Hello everyone, and welcome back to the channel. I know many of you enjoy listening to these stories as you fall asleep. So, before you drift off, I'd love for you to leave a comment letting me know where in the world you are tuning in from. Perhaps you are somewhere where the rain is falling against the glass, just as it is here. Or perhaps the night is clear and still, and the only sound is the hum of the world settling down to rest. Wherever you are, and whatever the hour, I am glad you have found your way here. Tonight, we step back in time. We travel to a place where the shadows were deeper and the nights were quieter. We tell these stories not to disturb the spirits of the past, but to remember the lives lived within the fog. These are real people, real histories, softened by the passage of a century. In the fog, edges are blurred, urgency fades. What remains is the story. The past is a safe place to rest, for the outcome is already written, and the silence has already fallen. There is a particular kind of comfort in the distance of history. When we look back at the Victorian era, at the gas-lit streets and the heavy velvet curtains, we are looking at a world that is sealed away in amber. The dangers that once felt immediate and sharp have been dulled by the steady march of time. The sirens of the modern world do not exist here. The frantic notifications of our daily lives cannot reach us here. There is only the slow, rhythmic clip-clop of a horse on wet cobblestones, and the hiss of a gas lamp fighting against the gloom. Tonight, we are going to walk through that gloom together, but you need not worry about losing your way. I will be your guide. We will move slowly, with the deliberate pace of a night watchman making his rounds. We will peer into windows where the firelight dances on the walls, and we will listen to the whispers that have been caught in the drafty corridors of old houses. But before we reach the first of our destinations, we must understand the atmosphere that surrounds us. We must understand the fog. In the London of the late 19th century, the fog was not merely a weather event. It was a presence. It was a character in the lives of every citizen, from the scullery maid scrubbing the front steps to the wealthy merchant checking his pocket watch. They called it a pea souper, a name that suggests something thick, something you could almost taste. And indeed, you could. It tasted of coal smoke and river water. It tasted of the thousands of chimneys that exhaled into the gray sky, turning the air into a heavy, suffocating blanket that dampened every sound. Imagine standing on the street corner in 1880. The air is cold, a damp chill that settles deep into the bones, the kind of cold that makes a wool coat feel like a necessary armor. You cannot see the end of the street. In fact, you can barely see your own hand if you extend it fully. The world has been reduced to a small, intimate circle of visibility, perhaps only a few feet wide. Everything beyond that circle is a mystery. The towering buildings, the spires of the churches, the bustling markets, they are all gone, swallowed by the gray drift. This isolation might sound frightening to us, accustomed as we are to bright lights and endless visibility. But there is a cozy quality to it as well. When the fog descended, it forced the world to slow down. Carriages could not race. They had to crawl. People could not rush. They had to walk with care, testing each step on the slick stones. The frantic pace of the industrial city was brought to a gentle halt, swaddled in the mist. It created a sense of privacy that is hard to find in our modern age. If you were walking home, wrapped in your scarf, you were alone in a way that felt absolute. You were an island. And when you finally reached your door and turned the heavy iron key in the lock, the relief was profound. to step out of the fog and into the warmth of a hallway, to smell the scent of beeswax polish and dried lavender, to see the golden glow of a fire waiting in the grate. That was a transition that defined the era. The contrast between the cold, obscure world outside and the warm, illuminated world inside was sharp and beautiful. It is in these interiors that our stories will take place. The Victorian home was designed to be a fortress against the elements. The walls were thick, built of brick and stone that had absorbed the rain of decades. The windows were tall, framed by heavy sash weights and covered by layers of fabric, lace to catch the day, velvet to shut out the night. Inside, life moved to the rhythm of the hearth. The fire was the heart of the room, the focal point around which all activity orbited. Imagine a library in one of these houses. The walls are lined with books, their leather spines cracking slightly with age, smelling of paper and glue. A clock ticks on the mantel, a slow, heavy pendulum swinging back and forth, counting seconds that feel longer than our own. A tea tray sits on a low table, the porcelain cups delicate and thin, the silver pot radiating a gentle heat. Outside, the wind might be howling, rattling the panes in their frames, but inside there is stillness. There is the scratching of a pen on paper, the rustle of a turning page, the clink of a spoon against a saucer. This is the setting for our journey tonight. We are not looking for the sudden shock of violence. We are looking for the mysteries that unfolded in these quiet rooms. We are looking for the secrets that were whispered behind closed doors, the tragedies that played out in the silence of a Sunday afternoon. Crime in this era was different. It was intimate. There were no digital footprints to trace, no cameras watching from the street corners. A person's life was their own, contained within their letters, their diaries, and the memories of those who knew them. When a mystery arose, it was solved through observation. It was solved by understanding human nature, by watching the way a person's hands trembled when they poured a drink, or noticing the mud on a pair of boots that should have been clean. Because we are looking back from such a great distance, we can view these events without fear. The people involved, the victims, the detectives, the accused, have all long since gone to their rest. Their joys and their sorrows have been smoothed over by the passage of time, just as the sharp edges of a stone are smoothed by the ceaseless motion of the river. We are not here to judge them. We are here to witness. We are here to sit by their firesides and listen to their stories, acknowledging that they too were once alive, that they too watched the rainfall and wondered what the future would hold. The fog serves as a veil. It separates us from them, allowing us to watch without being seen. It creates a dreamlike state where the logic of the waking world doesn't quite apply. In a dream, you can walk through a wall or float above a city. In these stories, we can drift through time. We can enter a locked room without a key. We can read a letter that was burned 100 years ago. Let us sink deeper into this atmosphere. Close your eyes and imagine the sound of the Thames at low tide. The water laps against the wooden pilings of the docks, a rhythmic sloshing sound that echoes under the bridges. The river is the artery of the city, dark and deep, carrying ships from corners of the world that most Londoners would never see. It carries the scent of tea from India, of spices from the East, of timber from the Americas. But tonight, the river is just a black ribbon in the mist, moving silently toward the sea. Imagine the gas lamps that line the embankment. They do not buzz like electric lights. They hiss. It is a soft, organic sound, the sound of burning gas pushing through a mantle. The light they cast is not white, but a pale, sickly yellow. It doesn't illuminate so much as it pushes the darkness back a few inches. It creates shadows that are long and fluid, shadows that seem to move even when the object casting them is still. In this light, everything looks different. A familiar face can look strange. A friendly gesture can look sinister. It is a world of ambiguity. And it is in this ambiguity that the Victorian mystery thrives. It is not about the stark facts of forensics. It is about the mood, the feeling, the uncertainty of what lies in the dark. We often think of the past as a simpler time, and in some ways, it was. The rhythms of life were dictated by the sun and the seasons. When the sun went down, the world went dark. There was no flipping a switch to banish the night. You had to light a candle. You had to strike a match, smell the sulfur flare, and watch the small flame catch the wick. You had to carry that small circle of light with you from room to room, watching the shadows jump and retreat as you moved. This reliance on fire for light and heat created a different relationship with the home. You were always tending to something. You were feeding the grate, trimming the wick, banking the coals for the night. It was a tactile existence. You felt the cold of the silver handle, the roughness of the wool blanket, the heat of the ceramic hot water bottle tucked into the foot of the bed. As we prepare to hear these stories, I want you to focus on those tactile details. Do not focus on the fear. Focus on the texture of the lace on a dress. Focus on the condensation on a window pane. Focus on the smell of old paper and rain. These are the anchors that will keep you safe. These are the details that will lull you to sleep. The stories we are about to explore are an anthology of the lost. They are tales of people who vanished into the fog or who were found within it. Some of them are famous, their names etched into the folklore of true crime. Others are forgotten, known only to the dusty archives of the local parish records. But they all share a common thread: the silence of history. We will visit a manor house in the rolling hills of Wiltshire, where a family's perfect facade was shattered by a single night's event. We will travel to the bustling streets of Glasgow to read the secret letters of a young woman who loved too dangerously. We will stand in the golden wheat fields of Hampshire under a summer sun that hides a dark secret. We will board a ship drifting aimlessly in the Atlantic, its crew missing, its breakfast table set for a meal that was never eaten. But we will not rush. There is no hurry. The ship has been drifting for 150 years. The house in Wiltshire still stands, its windows watching the valley. The letters are preserved in a museum, the ink faded to brown. We have all the time in the world. So, settle yourself. Adjust your pillows. Pull the blanket up to your chin. Let the tension of your own day dissolve. Whatever worries you are carrying, let them drift away like smoke from a chimney. They do not belong here. Here, there is only the story. Imagine that you are sitting in a comfortable armchair. The fabric is soft velvet, worn smooth by years of use. There is a fire crackling in the hearth before you. The logs shift and settle, sending a shower of sparks up the chimney. The room is warm. Outside, the wind is picking up, rattling the window frames, but the glass holds firm. You are safe inside. You have a cup of tea on the table beside you. You can see the steam rising from it, curling into the air. I'm sitting in the chair opposite you. I have a book in my hands. The cover is heavy and dark. I open it, the pages whispering as they turn. I find the first chapter. I look up at you and I begin to read. The fog outside is thickening now. It has swallowed the garden gate, It has erased the street lamp on the corner. It is pressing against the glass, a wall of gray silence. But we are not concerned with what is outside. We are concerned with what is within. Our first journey takes us away from the city. We leave the hissing gas lamps of London behind. We travel west, following the line of the railway as it cuts through the countryside. The landscape changes. The tight rows of brick terraced houses give way to open fields. The gray sky opens up, becoming a vast expanse of clouds. We are traveling to the year 1860. It is June. The summer has been warm, and the hedgerows are thick with greenery. The air smells of cut grass and elder flower. But even here, in the idyllic countryside, the night holds its secrets. We are approaching a house that sits in a valley surrounded by trees. It is a large house built in the Georgian style, with symmetrical windows and a heavy front door. It is a house that speaks of order, of discipline, of a life lived by strict rules. But rules, as we know, are often broken when the sun goes down. The house is called Road Hill. It is sleeping now. The lights are out. The family is in their beds. The servants have retired to the attic. The only sound is the wind in the trees and the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. Let us walk down the first of these quiet streets, or rather, let us walk up the gravel driveway of this country estate. The gravel crunches softly under our feet, but no one hears us. We are ghosts in this narrative. We are observers. We approach the heavy oak door. We do not need to knock. We simply drift through into the cool, still air of the hallway. The story begins here, not with a scream, but with a silence. It begins with a house that is holding its breath, waiting for the morning to come. It begins with the simple, mundane routines of a family that believes it is safe. And as we stand in the darkened hallway of Road Hill House, let us remember that safety is a feeling, not a fact. But for you, listening to my voice, the safety is real. You are protected by the distance of years. You are protected by the screen, by the speaker, by the warmth of your own bed. The fog has followed us here, swirling around the eaves of the house, dampening the world, preparing us for the tale. The stage is set. The players are in their places. The curtain is about to rise on a tragedy that captivated a nation, a mystery that began in the quiet of a summer night. Let us listen. Walls are built to define what is ours. They are constructed of brick and mortar, rising from the earth to separate the chaotic wildness of nature from the ordered calm of the home. But walls, for all their strength, are porous things. They cannot keep out the fog that presses against the glass, nor can they keep out the silence that settles like dust in the corners of a room. Tonight, we travel to a place where the walls were thick and the doors were bolted, yet the silence found a way in. We find ourselves in the lush, rolling landscape of Wiltshire. It is a county of ancient stones and chalk hills, where the history of England is written in the earth itself. The year is 1860, a time when the Victorian era was settling into its comfortable middle age. The railways were stitching the country together, bringing coal and news from London, but here in the valley, the rhythm of life was still dictated by the rising and setting of the sun. The village of Road is a cluster of stone cottages, a place where neighbors knew neighbors, and the business of one was the business of all. But set apart from the village, tucked away behind a screen of shrubbery and trees, stood Road Hill House. It was a handsome structure, built with the symmetry and solidity that the Georgians admired. It had 3 stories, a gray slate roof, and windows that looked out over a sprawling garden. It was a house that projected an image of absolute stability. To the casual observer walking along the turnpike road, it was a fortress of domestic respectability. The lawns were manicured, the hedges were trimmed. It was the home of Samuel Kent, a factory inspector for the government, a man whose very profession was the maintenance of standards and the enforcement of rules. Samuel Kent was a man who believed in order. He was 59 years old, with the bearing of someone who expected to be obeyed. He had built a life here in the valley that was as structured as a clock mechanism. There was a time for breakfast, a time for prayer, a time for the extinguishing of lights. He lived here with his second wife, Mary, and a large brood of children from both his marriages. It was a full house, echoing with the sounds of footsteps on floorboards, the murmur of lessons in the schoolroom, and the distant clatter of pans in the kitchen. Yet, despite the number of people living within its walls, there was a sense of isolation that clung to the property. It sat in a hollow, shielded from the wind, but also shielded from the eyes of the world. The date is Friday, the 29th of June. The day has been warm, the kind of English summer day where the heat seems to rise from the grass itself, heavy with the scent of pollen and damp earth. The sun has traced its long arc across the sky, casting shadows that lengthened and stretched across the drawing room carpet. We can imagine the slow drift of the afternoon, the sound of croquet mallets on the lawn, the rustle of stiff crinoline dresses as the women moved through the halls. The house was alive, breathing in the summer air through open windows. But as the evening approaches, the house begins to close itself off. This is a ritual we must observe closely, for it is the ritual of safety. As the sky turns a deep bruised purple and the first stars begin to prick the canopy of the night, the process of securing the home begins. It is a series of sounds, a mechanical lullaby that signals the end of the day. We hear the heavy thud of the front door being pushed shut. We hear the metallic slide of the top bolt, click. We hear the slide of the bottom bolt, clack. Then, the turning of the key in the great iron lock. The chain is fastened across the wood. The house is now a sealed vessel. Mr. Kent moves through the ground floor with a lantern in his hand. The gas lamps have been turned down, leaving only the warm, flickering glow of the candle to guide him. He checks the drawing room windows. He checks the library. The shutters are pulled tight, barring the view of the garden. The heavy velvet drapes are drawn, muffling the sound of the wind that has begun to pick up outside. The house turns inward. The focus shifts from the green world of the garden to the warm, enclosed world of the hearth and the hallway. The servants, too, are part of this retreat. There is the cook, the housemaid, and the nursemaid. They move through the back corridors, extinguishing the last of the kitchen fires. The copper pans hanging on the wall catch the final glimmers of light before vanishing into the gloom. They ascend the back stairs, their footsteps soft on the wooden treads, moving up toward the attic rooms where they sleep. The hierarchy of the day dissolves into the equality of sleep. On the first floor, the family retires. There is the rustle of fabric, the splashing of water in porcelain basins, the murmured good nights exchanged in the corridor. Doors are closed. One by one, the rectangles of light that spill out into the hallway are extinguished. The house settles. You know this sound. It is the sound of a house cooling down after a long day. The timber frames contract with a soft creak. A floorboard settles back into place. A pipe hums deep within the walls. It is a symphony of stillness. We drift now into the nursery. This is the heart of the house tonight. It is a room on the second floor, a sanctuary of childhood. The air here is different. It smells of lavender, of warm flannel, and the faint sweet scent of milk. A small night light burns, casting long, wavering shadows against the wallpaper. The wallpaper is patterned with flowers, an endless repetition of blooms that have watched over the sleep of many children. In this room, the nursemaid, Elizabeth Guth, prepares for bed. She is a young woman, new to the household, tasked with the care of the youngest children. She moves quietly, mindful of the sleepers. In the room with her are two children. There is the baby, sleeping in a cradle near her bed. And there is Francis Saville Kent. Saville, as he is called, is 3 years old. He is a boy with fair hair and the heavy, trusting sleep of the very young. He lies in his cot, a sturdy wooden structure with high sides. He is covered by a blanket, tucked in against the slight chill that always descends on the valley in the early hours. We can see the rise and fall of his chest. We can hear the soft rhythm of his breathing. It is a sound of absolute peace. He is the golden child of the family, the favorite, the one on whom the father's affections are most visibly draped. Elizabeth checks on him one last time. She smooths the covering. She ensures the window is secure. She climbs into her own bed, blows out the candle, and lets the darkness take the room. The nursery door is left slightly ajar, a common practice to allow the parents to hear if a child cries out in the night. Across the hall, in their own room, Samuel and Mary Kent are sleeping. The door to their room is also unlocked. The house is a network of open connections on the upper floor, a web of family proximity, all floating above the strictly bolted and barred ground floor. Time begins to stretch. The hours of the night are long and fluid. In the absence of clocks and schedules, time is measured only by the movement of the moon through the sky and the slow burning down of the embers in the grate. The house enters the deep drift of the middle night. Outside, the world has been erased by the dark. The garden, so orderly by day, is now a mass of shadows. The shrubbery becomes a dark ocean surrounding the island of the house. A dog barks somewhere in the distance, perhaps the yard dog, a large Newfoundland named Rover. He barks once, twice, and then settles back into silence. The sound does not disturb the sleepers. It is merely a ripple in the quiet, a reminder that there is life outside the walls. We float through the hallways. The grandfather clock in the hall below ticks steadily, tick-tock, tick-tock. It is the heartbeat of the house, indifferent to the human lives it measures. It marks 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, the deepest part of the night. This is the hour when the body temperature drops, when dreams are most vivid, when the soul feels most loosely tethered to the waking world. At some point in this velvet darkness, the silence is broken, not by a scream nor by a crash, but by a presence, a movement. Elizabeth Guth stirs in her sleep. The mind has a way of sensing changes in the environment even when the eyes are closed. She wakes up. The room is dim, lit only by the faint gray light of the coming dawn filtering through the curtains. She turns over. She looks toward the cot. It is a moment of confusion, a gap in the pattern. The cot is empty. The impression of the child's body is still on the pillow. The blanket is turned back, but Saville is not there. Now, in a story told to frighten, this would be the moment of panic. But real life is rarely so dramatic in the immediate moment. The mind seeks logic. The mind seeks the mundane. Elizabeth looks at the empty cot, and she does not feel fear. She feels a mild, sleepy puzzlement. She assumes the most natural thing in the world, The mother has come. Mrs. Kent, she reasons, must have heard the boy whimper and come to take him into her own bed across the hall. It is a reasonable thought. It is a comforting thought. It fits the pattern of a loving home. So Elizabeth turns over. She pulls the quilt up to her chin. She closes her eyes. She allows the rhythm of her own breathing to lull her back into the warm embrace of sleep. She does not know that the door to the nursery is standing wider open than she left it. She does not know that the window in the drawing room downstairs is unlatched. She simply sleeps, wrapped in the safety of her assumption. The night moves on. The sun begins to crest the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pale blue and gray. The birds in the ivy begin their morning chorus, a cheerful, ignorant song that heralds the start of a new day. The shadows in the nursery retreat. The light strengthens, revealing the dust motes dancing in the air, revealing the pattern of the wallpaper, revealing the empty cot. At 5 o'clock, Elizabeth wakes again. The baby in the cradle is restless. She rises to tend to her duties. She looks again at the cot. It is still empty. Now, a seed of doubt is planted. It is not yet terror, but it is a distinct unease. She dresses. She smooths her apron. She walks out into the corridor. The floorboards creak under her feet. She goes to the door of the master bedroom. She knocks. There is no answer. She opens the door gently. Mr. and Mrs. Kent are asleep. She looks around the room, scanning for the small, fair-haired figure of the boy. He is not there. She retreats. Perhaps he is in the other children's room. She checks. No. Perhaps he is downstairs. She descends the staircase, her hand trailing on the polished banister. The house is cold in the morning air. The drawing room door is ajar. She pushes it open. The shutters are unbarred. The window is open. The sash is raised, and the morning breeze is blowing the curtains inward, billowing like ghosts. The damp air of the garden is flowing into the house. This is the breach. This is the violation of the safety frame. The fortress has been opened from the inside. Elizabeth stands there for a moment, the cold air hitting her face. She does not scream. She simply feels the weight of the situation settling upon her. She turns and goes back upstairs. She knocks on the master bedroom door again, louder this time. "Please, ma'am," she says when Mrs. Kent stirs. "Is Master Saville with you?" The answer is a sleepy, confused negative. "With me? No, he is not with me. He is not in the nursery, ma'am." And with those words, the reality of the night finally breaks the surface of the morning. The silence of Road Hill House is shattered. But let us pause here. Let us not rush into the chaos that follows. Let us hold this moment in suspension. The moment before the police arrive. The moment before the accusations begin. The moment before the world descends on this quiet valley. For now the house is still standing. The breakfast table is set. The kettles are beginning to boil in the kitchen. The routine is trying to assert itself against the tragedy. There's profound sadness in objects that have lost their purpose. The empty chair, the folded napkin, the toy soldier left on the rug. They are waiting for a hand that will not return. The search begins. It is a frantic, disorganized affair. The father, Samuel Kent, orders his carriage. He rides out to the village to the police station, his face set in a grim mask of worry. The servants scour the grounds. They look in the shrubbery. They look in the tall grass. They call his name. Saville. Saville. The name drifts over the hedges, carried by the wind, unanswered. It was a discovery that would change the town forever, yet it happened with a terrible quietness. 2 local men helping with the search entered the outdoor privy. a small outbuilding used before the days of indoor plumbing. It was dark inside, cool and damp. There, hidden from the light of the sun, they found what the house had lost. We will not dwell on the condition of the child. It is enough to know that his sleep had become eternal. The violence of the act stands in stark contrast to the gentleness of the setting, and it is this contrast that haunts us. A child taken from a warm bed in a locked house, a life extinguished within the safety of the family walls. The body was carried back to the house. It was placed in the kitchen on a table scrubbed white with lye and sand. The doors were locked again. The curtains were drawn against the day. The house, which had breathed open in the morning, now clenched shut in grief. But as the immediate shock began to fade, a new feeling took its place, a cold, creeping realization. The house had been locked from the inside. The windows were secured, the doors were bolted. There was no sign of a break-in, no shattered glass, no forced lock. The danger had not come from the woods. It had not come from the village. It had not come from a stranger wandering the roads. The danger had been inside the house all along. It had walked the corridors in stockinged feet. It had known which floorboards creaked. It had known how to slide the bolt without a sound. The fog of suspicion began to rise, thicker than any weather the valley had ever seen. It settled over the family. It settled over the servants. Who had walked the halls that night? Who had held the child? Who had opened the window? The local police were baffled. They were men of the countryside, used to dealing with poachers and petty thieves. They looked at the grieving father, the weeping mother, the silent, pale-faced siblings, and they saw only a wall of respectability. They could not imagine that a monster could wear a silk waistcoat or a crinoline dress. They trampled the garden in their clumsy search for clues. They moved objects. They lost evidence. They were out of their depth, drowning in the complexities of a case that required a surgeon's scalpel, not a farmer's spade. And so, the call was sent out. A call to London, a call to Scotland Yard. The house waited. The family waited. They sat in the drawing room, the tea cooling in their cups, the clocks ticking on the mantels. They looked at one another, and for the first time, the familiarity of a face was not a comfort, but a question. The valley held its breath. The news spread along the railway lines, carried by the telegraph wires that hummed in the wind. A murder in a country house, a child taken, a mystery locked from the inside. It was the stuff of nightmares, but it was also the stuff of fascination. But before the detective arrives, before the famous Jack Witcher steps onto the platform at the railway station, let us linger one last time in the atmosphere of the house itself. Think of the nursery as it was left, the empty cot, the impression on the pillow slowly fading as the feathers expanded back into place, the sunlight moving across the floor, marking the passage of a day that Seville would never see. The silence in that room is heavy. It is a silence that asks, why? It is a place where neighbors knew neighbors, and front doors were left unlocked under the watchful gaze of the summer moon. But Road Hill House had locked its doors tight. And yet, the tragedy occurred. This tells us something profound about the nature of safety. We build our fortresses, we lock our gates, we pull our curtains, but we cannot lock out the human heart with all its dark and tangled roots. The sun sets on Road Hill House. The first day of the aftermath comes to an end. The candles are lit again, but their light is different now. It is no longer the warm glow of domestic comfort. It is the harsh, flickering light of an interrogation lamp. The shadows in the corners seem deeper. The creak of the floorboards sounds like an accusation. We leave the family there, frozen in their tableau of grief and suspicion. The father, stern and unreadable. The mother, collapsed in sorrow. The siblings, watching, waiting. And the servants, whispering in the kitchen, their eyes darting to the ceiling, wondering what secrets are hidden in the plaster and the lath. The rain begins to fall again, washing the roof, washing the garden, washing the stone step where the window stood open. It is a gentle rain, a weeping rain. It blurs the edges of the house until it looks like a watercolor painting left out in the storm. We step back from the house. We retreat down the gravel driveway, leaving the crunch of our footsteps behind. We move back through the shrubbery, back to the road, back into the comforting anonymity of the fog. The story is not over. In fact, the true mystery is just beginning. A man is coming from London, a man with eyes that miss nothing, a man who will peel back the layers of this house like the skin of an onion until the tears flow and the truth is revealed. But that is a journey for the next chapter. For now, let the rain fall. Let the house sleep its uneasy sleep. Let the silence return to the valley. Truth is often compared to a light, a sudden beam that cuts through the darkness to reveal what was hidden. But in the tangled affairs of the human heart, truth is more like water. It seeps slowly through the cracks in the plaster, dampening the wallpaper, softening the floorboards, until the structure itself begins to shift under the weight of what it holds. Tonight, we travel back to the platform of a country railway station where the steam from the engine hisses against the damp July air. The year was 1860. The summer had been wet, the kind of English summer where the green of the hills is deepened by constant rain and the roads are churned into thick, clinging mud. On the platform stood a man who did not belong to the rhythm of the countryside. He was a man of the city, a man of London, where the gas lamps burned all night and the fog tasted of coal and industry. His name was Jack Whicher. He was not a man of imposing stature, nor did he carry himself with the swagger of a soldier or the loud authority of a local magistrate. He was a man who knew how to be still. He wore a heavy coat that absorbed the damp, his hat pulled low, his eyes scanning the horizon not with urgency, but with a quiet, patient hunger. He was a detective inspector from Scotland Yard, one of the original 8, a new breed of professional who treated the unraveling of secrets not as a battle, but as a science. He stepped from the train and into the waiting carriage, the leather seats cool against his back, the smell of old tobacco smoke lingering in the upholstery. The wheels began to turn, grinding against the gravel, carrying him away from the station and toward the village of Road, toward the house that sat in the valley, waiting for him. The journey was slow. The horses moved with a rhythmic, hypnotic gait, their hooves striking the earth with a dull thud that seemed to count the seconds. Whicher watched the hedgerows pass by, the hawthorn and the briar tangled together, hiding the fields beyond. He knew that a house was much like those hedgerows. From the outside, it presents a wall of leaves and flowers, a barrier of respectability. But if one looks closely, if one knows where to part the branches, one can see the darkness that lies at the roots. When he arrived at Road Hill House, the silence of the valley seemed to deepen. The house stood gray and imposing, its windows like heavy-lidded eyes watching his approach. He did not storm the front door. He did not demand answers. He simply arrived like a shadow lengthening in the afternoon sun. He was led in by a servant whose hands trembled slightly as she took his hat, the fabric damp from the mist. The hallway was cool, smelling of beeswax and lavender, that peculiar scent of a well-kept home that masks the stale air of tension. Witcher walked softly. His boots were made for city pavements, but here on the polished wood, they made hardly a sound. He moved through the house like a ghost, disturbing nothing, yet seeing everything. He began his work not with questions, but with the architecture. To understand the crime, he believed, one must understand the stage upon which it was enacted. He walked the length of the corridors, counting his steps, 12 paces from the master bedroom to the nursery, 8 paces from the nursery to the spare room. He noted the creak of the third stair from the top, a sound that would betray anyone trying to descend in the silence of the night. He touched the heavy velvet drapes that hung in the drawing room, feeling the dust that had settled in the folds, the dust of a summer that had started with such promise and ended in such tragedy. The house began to speak to him in its own language. It spoke of routines and rituals, of doors locked at a certain hour, of candles snuffed out in a specific order. Witcher was a man who understood the language of objects. He knew that a chair pulled slightly away from a table told a story of a hasty departure. He knew that a window unlatched was an invitation, or perhaps an escape. He stood for a long time in the drawing room, watching the light fade, listening to the house settle. He was building a map in his mind, not just of the walls and the doors, but of the people who lived within them. The family watched him with a mixture of hope and dread. Samuel Kent, the father, a man of rigid habits and high expectations, watched the detective with a wary eye. He was a man used to controlling his world, used to the order of the factory and the ledger. But here was a man he could not control, a man who looked at his respectable life and saw only a puzzle to be solved. Witcher spoke to him in low, measured tones, his voice calm, devoid of accusation. He asked about the windows. He asked about the dog. He asked about the nursemaid. He wrote the answers down in a small notebook, the scratch of his pencil the only sound in the room, a dry, rhythmic scratching that seemed to peel away the layers of the father's composure. But it was not the grand gestures that interested Witcher. It was the small, mundane details of domestic life. He turned his attention to the laundry. In a Victorian household, the laundry was a sacred cycle, a weekly ritual of washing, drying, pressing, and counting. Every sheet, every shirt, every handkerchief was accounted for, listed in a book, checked off by the mistress of the house. It was a system of absolute order, and it was here, in the quiet, steamy world of the laundry room, that Witcher found the thread he would pull. A nightdress was missing. It was such a simple thing, a garment of white cotton, worn for sleep, worn in the privacy of a bedroom. It was not a weapon. It was not a grand clue. It was an absence. The laundry list said it should be there. The basket said it was not. Witcher held the list in his hand, the paper soft and worn at the edges. He looked at the handwriting, the neat loops of the letters, the ink faded to a sepia brown. A nightdress. Where could it go? A house does not simply swallow cotton. He began to ask about the garment. He asked the nursemaid, Elizabeth Guff, whose eyes were red from weeping. He asked the other servants who stood in their aprons, twisting their hands, afraid to speak out of turn. He asked the daughter of the house, Constance. Constance Kent was 16 years old. She was a girl on the threshold of womanhood, stout and plain, with a face that gave nothing away. She had been educated, she had been disciplined, she had been taught the virtues of silence and obedience. Witcher watched her. He watched her hands as she sat in the parlor, working a needle through a piece of embroidery, up and down. up and down. The rhythm was perfect, the stitches even. She did not look up as he entered the room. She did not startle. She simply continued her work, the silver needle flashing in the light of the window. Witcher sat opposite her. He did not loom. He did not shout. He simply sat, his coat open, his notebook on his knee. He asked her about the night dress. He asked her about the laundry. He asked her if she had slept well on the night in question. Her answers were polite, brief, and impenetrable. She spoke of the mundane details of her week, the books she had read, the walks she had taken in the garden, the letters she had written to friends. She wrapped herself in the armor of the ordinary. But Witcher noticed the stillness in her. It was not the stillness of peace. It was the stillness of a held breath. He noticed that she did not ask about her brother, the lost child. She did not speculate on who might have done this terrible thing. She simply existed, calm and detached, like a statue in a garden that remains unmoved by the storm that rages around it. Witcher felt a coldness radiate from her, a chill that had nothing to do with the drafty corridors of the house. It was the chill of a secret kept so deep that it had frozen the heart around it. He moved his investigation to the garden. The rain had stopped for a moment, leaving the air thick with the scent of wet earth and bruised grass. He walked the path that led from the drawing room window to the privy, the path that the intruder or the family member must have taken. He looked at the ground. The mud would have held footprints, but the rain had washed them away, smoothing the earth back into innocence. He examined the window itself. It was a sash window, heavy and counterweighted. He lifted it, feeling the resistance, listening to the slide of the wood in the frame. It made a sound, a low rumble. Would it have woken the dog? The dog, a large Newfoundland, was known to bark at strangers. Yet on that night, the dog had been silent. The silence of the dog was a piece of the puzzle that Witcher turned over and over in his mind. It suggested familiarity. It suggested that the person who opened the window, who walked the path, who carried the child, was someone the dog knew, someone whose scent was part of the fabric of the house. He spent hours in the privy, the small outbuilding where the child had been found. It was a dark, unpleasant place, far removed from the comfort of the nursery with its warm fire and soft blankets. Witcher stood there, breathing in the damp, stagnant air, trying to imagine the mind that would bring a child here. It was a place of disposal, a place of waste. To leave a child here was an act of supreme rejection. It was not a crime of passion, he thought. It was a crime of erasure. Someone wanted the child gone, not just dead, but removed from the family circle, cast out into the dark. He returned to the house as the evening began to draw in. The lamps were being lit, casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. The family gathered for dinner, a ritual that could not be broken even by tragedy. Witcher watched them from the doorway. The clink of silverware on china, the murmur of requests for salt or water, the heavy, suffocating silence that filled the spaces between the words. He saw the way Samuel Kent looked at his daughter, a look of confusion and perhaps a dawning horror. He saw the way Constance ate her meal, methodical and calm, cutting her meat into precise squares, lifting the fork to her mouth, chewing slowly. Witcher retreated to the room that had been assigned to him. He sat by the window, looking out at the valley shrouded in mist. He took out his notebook again. He wrote down the name Constance. He underlined it. He wrote down night dress. He underlined it. He wrote down the silence. He knew, with the instinct of a hunter who has tracked his quarry for miles, that the answer lay in the missing garment. If he could find the night dress or explain its absence, he would have the key. He began to reconstruct the timeline of the laundry. The maid had counted the pieces on Monday morning. The list was written. The basket was filled. Constance had thrown her nightdress into the basket, or had she? The maid remembered it being there, but later when the basket was unpacked, it was gone. Witcher theorized. He imagined the girl in the quiet of her room after the deed was done. The nightdress would have been stained. It would have carried the evidence of the crime. She could not wash it, not without raising suspicion. She could not burn it, for the smell of burning cotton would fill the house. So she had to hide it, or she had to replace it. He discovered that Constance had possessed 3 nightdresses. All were accounted for in her drawers. But were they the same 3? He looked closer at the fabric. He looked closer at the laundry list. He realized that one of the nightdresses in the drawer was different. It was an old one that she had supposedly outgrown. She had put an old nightdress in the laundry to make up the number, to hide the loss of the one she had been wearing. It was the sleight of hand, a trick of accounting. It was a brilliant, cold calculation for a girl of 16. The days passed. Witcher remained in the house, a constant, quiet presence. He spoke to the local police, who were bumbling and deferential to the wealthy Mr. Kent. They had looked for a stranger, a vagrant, a madman from the woods. Witcher gently steered them back to the house. "The answer is here," he told them, his voice low and certain. "The answer is inside." He felt the net tightening, but it was a net made of silk, soft and yielding, yet impossible to break. He needed the nightdress. He searched the house again. He searched the chimney flues, running his hands along the sooty bricks. He searched the space under the floorboards in the attic. He searched the hollows of the trees in the garden. He found nothing. The nightdress had vanished as completely as if it had never existed, but the absence was enough. The absence was the proof. He confronted Constance again. This time, the air in the room was heavier. The fire in the grate had burned down to embers, casting a dull red glow. "The nightdress, Miss Kent," he said softly. "Where is it?" She looked at him with those flat, unreadable eyes. "I do not know," she said. "It must have been lost in the washing." "A nightdress is not a handkerchief," Witcher said, his voice gentle, almost fatherly. "It does not simply float away." She did not blink. She did not fidget. She held his gaze, and in that moment, Witcher saw the vast, terrifying strength of her will. She was a fortress. She had locked the doors of her soul just as her father locked the doors of the house. She would not let him in. The investigation became a siege. The press descended on the village, hungry for news. They painted Witcher as a villain, a working-class intruder harassing a respectable young lady. They could not believe, would not believe that a girl of her breeding could commit such a crime. They wanted a monster, a stranger, a beast. Witcher offered them a mirror, and they hated him for it. He felt the weight of the public gaze, the scorn of the newspapers. But he did not waver. He knew what he knew. He knew the house. He knew the silence. He knew the missing piece of cotton. He formally arrested her. It was done quietly, without handcuffs, without drama. He simply told her that she must come with him to the magistrate. She stood up, smoothed her skirts, and put on her bonnet. She looked at her father, who stood by the fireplace, his face the color of ash. She did not cry. She did not plead. She walked out of the house, down the steps, and into the waiting carriage. As they rode away, the fog began to lift slightly, revealing the green fields of Wiltshire, indifferent to the tragedy. Witcher looked at the girl sitting opposite him. She was looking out the window, watching the trees pass by. He wondered what she was thinking. Was she thinking of her brother? Was she thinking of the prison that awaited her? Or was she thinking of the night dress and the secret place where it lay rotting, hidden from the eyes of the world? The magistrate's hearing was a theater of denial. The evidence was circumstantial. The night dress was missing, yes, but that proved nothing, the lawyers argued. A laundry mistake, a servant's error. The idea that this young lady, this flower of Victorian girlhood, could be a killer was dismissed as a fantasy of a suspicious mind. Witcher stood in the court, calm and impassive, reciting his facts. The distances, the times, the locks, the list. But the court was not ready for the truth. They were not ready to look into the abyss of the domestic. Constance was released. The verdict was greeted with cheers in the gallery. Witcher was humiliated. He was sent back to London, a man in disgrace, his career in tatters. He had failed to provide the smoking gun. He had only the silence and the shadow of a missing garment. He returned to the city, to the fog and the noise, leaving Road Hill House behind. But the house did not forget. The family tried to move on, to rebuild their lives over the fault line of the murder. They moved away, leaving the house empty. The wind blew through the valley, rattling the sash windows, whistling down the chimneys. The garden grew wild, the briars reclaiming the path to the privy. The house stood as a monument to the unsolved, a stone shell holding a breath that it could not release. And Witcher. He retired. He grew old. He lived in a small house in London, surrounded by his books and his memories. He rarely spoke of the case, but one imagines that on rainy nights when the fire was low and the shadows stretched across the floor, his mind would travel back to that valley. He would hear the creak of the stair. He would smell the lavender in the hallway. He would see the needle flashing in the sunlight. He knew that truth, like water, eventually finds its way out. He knew that the story was not over. He knew that silence, no matter how deep, cannot last forever. For 5 years, the silence held. Constance went to a finishing school in France. She lived the life of a young lady of leisure. She learned to paint, to speak French, to arrange flowers. She seemed to have escaped the shadow of the inspector. But the shadow was not outside her. It was within. The truth is a heavy burden to carry alone. It presses on the chest. It weighs down the limbs. It sours the taste of food and dulls the brightness of the sun. The armor she had built, the fortress of her will, began to crumble not from an external assault, but from the rot inside. The inspector had left, but his questions remained. They hung in the air of her life, invisible and persistent. Where is the night dress? Why was the window open? Why was the dog silent? These questions did not need to be spoken aloud to be heard. They were whispered by the wind, by the rustle of silk, by the ticking of the clock in the dead of night. We leave Jack Witcher now, sitting in his armchair in London, watching the smoke from his pipe drift toward the ceiling. He is a man who waits. He knows that the human conscience is a restless thing. He knows that the past is never truly dead. It is merely sleeping, waiting for a voice to waken. And far away, in a quiet room in a religious retreat in Brighton, a young woman is kneeling in prayer. The years have passed. The anger has cooled. The fog has settled. But the ghost of the brother she lost, and the ghost of the brother she took, stands beside her. The time for the inspector has passed. The time for the priest is approaching. The rain continues to fall on the roof of the Road Hill house, washing away the dust, washing away the years. The house is empty now, but if you listen closely, you can still hear the echo of footsteps on the stairs. Slow, deliberate footsteps. The footsteps of a man who looked at a house and saw a puzzle. The footsteps of a girl who looked at a house and saw a prison. And between them, the silence of a mystery that was solved not by evidence, but by the unbearable weight of a secret kept too long. The inspector's shadow fades, merging with the darkness of the hallway. The door closes softly. The lock clicks, and we are left outside, in the cool, damp air, waiting for the dawn that will bring the final confession, the final release of the breath that has been held for half a decade. But that is a story for the morning. For now, the night belongs to the watcher and the watched. It is often said that a house is not merely a structure of brick and mortar, but a vessel for the lives it contains. It absorbs the whispers of its inhabitants, holds the warmth of their fires long after the embers have died, and keeps the secrets of the night within the cool plaster of its walls. We like to believe that once the heavy oak door is bolted and the curtains are drawn against the dark, we have created a sanctuary, a place where the chaos of the world cannot touch us. But sometimes, the walls do not keep the danger out, they keep it in. And in the silence of a sleeping house, the most profound mysteries are often born not from the intrusion of a stranger, but from the quiet shifts of the family itself. Tonight, we travel back to a time when the night was truly dark, illuminated only by the flicker of gas lamps and the pale wash of the moon. We find ourselves in the rolling verdant hills of Wiltshire, England. It is the summer of 1860, a season of heavy heat and lush, overgrown gardens. Here, the landscape is a patchwork of deep greens and earthen browns, a place where the valleys dip low enough to catch the mist that rises from the river Frome. It is a quiet corner of the world where the loudest sound is often the wind moving through the ancient trees or the distant rhythmic clip-clop of a horse on a country lane. In the village of Road, nestled within this green silence, stands a house that demands our attention. It is known as Road Hill House. It is a handsome building, Georgian in its sensibility, with a symmetrical face that suggests order, propriety, and calm. It sits back from the road, guarded by a high stone wall and a dense screen of laurel bushes and shrubbery. To the passerby, it is a symbol of Victorian stability, a place where a gentleman might raise his family in peace, far from the grime and noise of industrial London. The windows are tall and narrow, reflecting the gray sky, and the front door is solid, painted a dark, welcoming hue, promising safety to those who hold the key. The master of this house is Samuel Kent, a factory inspector by trade, a man of rigid habits and high expectations. He is a figure of authority, a man who believes in the rules of society and the sanctity of the domestic sphere. He has brought his family here to live a life of quiet respectability. There is his wife, Mary, who is currently with child, and a bustling household of children from 2 marriages, along with the servants who keep the wheels of this domestic machine turning. On the surface, it is a picture of perfect harmony, a clockwork world where everyone has their place and every hour has its purpose. But let us step closer. Let us walk up the gravel drive, feeling the crunch of the stones beneath our boots, and pass through the front door into the cool, dim interior. The air inside is still, smelling of beeswax polish, lavender, and the faint metallic tang of coal dust. The hallway is wide, the floorboards polished to a high shine that catches the light from the transom window above the door. A grandfather clock stands like a sentinel against the wall, its pendulum swinging with a slow, hypnotic rhythm. Tick-tock, tick-tock, marking time in a house that feels suspended in it. The wallpaper is a deep, rich crimson, patterned with intricate floral designs that seem to loop and curl in the shadows. Heavy velvet drapes hang at the windows, thick enough to muffle the sounds of the outside world, creating a cocoon of silence. It is a house of textures, the roughness of the wool carpets, the smooth, cool touch of the mahogany banister, the crisp stiffness of starched linens. It is a place designed for comfort, for the slow unraveling of family life. The date is Friday, the 29th of June. The heat of the day has begun to fade, replaced by the heavy, humid stillness of a summer evening. The sky outside is a bruised purple, the sun dipping below the horizon and casting long, stretching shadows across the lawn. Inside, the routine of the evening is unfolding with the precision of a well-rehearsed play. This is a world before electricity, where the transition from day to night is a physical process, a gradual dimming of the world. We watch as the lamps are lit, the gas hissing softly before blooming into a warm, yellow glow. The shadows in the corners of the room deepen, becoming soft and indistinct. In the dining room, the table is set for the evening meal. The silverware gleams against the white tablecloth, and the crystal glasses catch the flicker of the candlelight. The family gathers, their voices low and polite. There is the clink of cutlery on china, the rustle of fabric as they shift in their chairs. It is a scene of utter normalcy. They discuss the weather, the garden, the small, inconsequential news of the village. There is no sense of foreboding, no chill in the air to warn them that this is the last normal night they will ever know. The meal concludes, and the evening winds down. The younger children are taken up to the nursery, a process of sleepy protests and soft murmurs. The nursery is located on the second floor, a large, airy room that serves as the heart of the children's world. It is here that we find the youngest member of the family, Francis Saville Kent. He's just 3 years old, a boy with bright eyes and a head of golden curls, the cherished son of Samuel and Mary. He's placed in his cot, wrapped in the warmth of his blankets. The cot is sturdy, made of wood and cane, a safe harbor for a sleeping child. The nursemaid, Elizabeth Guff, oversees this bedtime ritual. She is a young woman, responsible for the safety and care of the little ones. She moves about the room with practiced efficiency, folding clothes, straightening the sheets, turning down the gas light until it is just a small blue bead of flame, enough to keep the total darkness at bay. She sleeps in this room as well, her bed positioned not far from the cot, a guardian in the night. As the hour grows late, the house begins to shut down. This is a ritual in itself, a series of locks and bolts that seal the family in for the night. Samuel Kent, as the head of the household, takes a lantern and walks the perimeter. We walk with him, our footsteps silent on the floorboards. We watch as he checks the windows in the drawing room, ensuring the latches are secure. We hear the heavy thud of the shutters being barred in the library. He moves to the back of the house, to the kitchen and the scullery, checking the back door. The key turns in the lock with a solid final click. The bolts are slid home, metal against metal. The house is now a fortress. The world outside, the wind, the fog, the rustling laurel bushes, is kept at bay. Inside, the air is still and safe. Samuel extinguishes the lamps on the ground floor, plunging the hallway into darkness. He ascends the stairs, the candlelight from his lantern casting a dancing shadow against the crimson wallpaper. He retires to his room, and one by one, the sounds of the house cease. The murmur of conversation fades. The footsteps stop. The doors are closed. By midnight, Road Hill House is asleep. The only sound is the ticking of the clock in the hall and the occasional settling of the house itself, the groan of a timber beam cooling in the night air, the rattle of a window pane in a sudden gust of wind. It is a deep, profound silence, the kind that feels heavy, like a blanket pulled up to the chin. In the nursery, Elizabeth Guff sleeps. The little boy, Seville, sleeps in his cot. The room is warm, smelling of milk and clean linen. Outside, the moon has risen, but it is obscured by clouds, casting a diffused gray light over the garden. The laurel bushes stand like dark, shapeless sentinels around the house. The fog has begun to roll in from the valley, thick and white, curling around the stone corners of the building, softening the edges of the world. Time passes. The clock chimes 1, then 2. The night is at its deepest point, the hour when the human spirit is most vulnerable, when dreams are most vivid. It is in this depth of the night that the rhythm of the house is broken, though almost imperceptibly. Elizabeth Guff stirs in her sleep. She is not sure what woke her. Perhaps it was a sound, perhaps a change in the air pressure. She opens her eyes, blinking against the gloom. The room is quiet. The gaslight still burns, a tiny star in the darkness. She turns over, pulling the quilt tighter around her shoulders. It is then that she notices something. A draft. A cool stream of air moving across the room, carrying with it the scent of the damp garden. She sits up, her heart beating a little faster, though she tells herself it is nothing. She looks toward the door of the nursery. It is ajar, just slightly. A sliver of darkness from the hallway spills into the room. She frowns. She is certain she closed it, but old houses are full of tricks. Latches slip, wood warps. She listens. There's no sound from the hallway, no footsteps, no creaking boards, just the silence. She looks toward the cot. In the dim light, she can see the shape of the pillow, the curve of the blanket. It appears empty. But the mind is slow to accept what it does not wish to see. She assumes the child is merely tucked deep into the bedding, or perhaps Mrs. Kent, the mother, has come in the night to take him to her own room, as she sometimes does when the boy is restless. It is a comforting thought, a rational explanation that allows the pulse to slow, the eyes to close again. The nursery is safe. The door is just a draft. The empty space is just a shadow. She lies back down. The fatigue of the day pulls at her. The rhythm of the clock, tick-tock, tick-tock, lulls her back toward sleep. The cool air from the open door mixes with the warmth of the room. She drifts off, carried away by the heavy tide of slumber, unaware that the world has shifted on its axis. The house holds its breath. The walls, which have seen everything, say nothing. The night wears on. The fog outside thickens, pressing against the glass like a living thing. The darkness begins to thin, turning from black to a deep charcoal gray. The birds in the garden begin their first tentative songs, unaware of the stillness inside the house. Morning arrives not with a shout, but with a slow, creeping light. The sun burns through the mist, revealing the dew on the grass, the spider webs strung like diamonds between the laurel leaves. Inside the house, the servants are the first to rise. The sound of the grate being raked out in the kitchen, the clatter of a kettle, the opening of shutters. The house wakes up, stretching its limbs. Elizabeth Guff wakes again. The light in the nursery is now clear and gray. She sits up and looks immediately at the cot. It is empty. The blankets are turned back, smooth and undisturbed, as if the child had simply evaporated. The impression of his small head is still visible on the pillow. She stands, a knot of unease tightening in her stomach. She walks to the door, opens it fully, and steps into the hallway. "Master Savile," she whispers. Her voice sounds too loud in the quiet corridor. She goes to the mother's room, knocking softly. When the door opens and she sees the mother's face, sleepy and confused, the realization hits her like a physical blow. The child is not there. He's not in the nursery. He's not with his mother. Panic is a cold thing. It starts in the chest and spreads to the fingertips. But in a house like this, panic is suppressed, pushed down beneath layers of decorum. The alarm is raised, but it is a hushed alarm. Servants are dispatched to search the rooms. "He must be hiding," someone says. "He has wandered off," says another. They check the closets, the space behind the curtains, the empty guest rooms where the furniture is covered in white sheets that look like ghosts in the morning light. Samuel Kent is awakened. He dresses hurriedly, his face set in a mask of concern that barely hides the rising fear. He organizes the search with the same efficiency he applies to his factory inspections. They move through the house, opening doors, calling the boy's name. Savile. Savile. The name echoes off the high ceilings, bouncing back unanswered. They move outside. The garden is wet with dew. The air is fresh and cool. The search expands to the grounds, to the dense shrubbery, to the high stone walls. The laurel bushes are thick, their leaves glossy and dark. The searchers push through the branches, their boots sinking into the soft earth. It is two local men, villagers who have joined the search, who find the anomaly. In the garden, there's an outbuilding, a privy used by the servants. It is a small, dark structure, hidden away behind the foliage. The door is closed. The men approach it slowly. There's a heaviness in the air here, a sense of gravity that pulls at the spirit. They open the door. The light spills into the small, confined space. And there, the search ends. We will not linger on the image of what they found. It is enough to say that the little boy was there, and that he was no longer part of this world. The blanket from his cot was wrapped around him. The silence of the night had claimed him. The discovery ripples back to the house. It is not a scream that carries the news, but a sudden, profound cessation of movement. The searchers stop. The servants in the kitchen stop. Samuel Kent, standing on the lawn, stops. The realization settles over Road Hill House like the fog that still clings to the valley floor. The safety of the home has been breached. The fortress has failed. But the horror of the crime is matched by the mystery of it. The doors were locked. The windows were barred. The dog, a large Newfoundland that barked at the slightest disturbance, had remained silent throughout the night. There was no forced entry, no broken glass, no footprints leading away from the house. The conclusion is inescapable, and it is more chilling than any intruder could be. The danger did not come from the outside. It was already there. It had been sitting at the dinner table. It had walked the halls in the candlelight. It had slept under the same roof. The police are summoned. They arrive in their carriages, men in dark coats with notebooks and stern faces. But they are entering a puzzle box. They find a house that is closed tight against them, not by locks, but by the impenetrable silence of the family. The Kents retreat behind their veil of respectability. They answer questions with polite brevity. They do not know. They did not hear. They were asleep. The local constabulary is baffled. They are men used to poaching and petty theft, not this. Not a crime that feels like a dark fairy tale brought to life. They look at the nursemaid, Elizabeth Gooth. They look at the father, Samuel. They look at the sullen, quiet half-sister. Constance and her brother, William. They look at the walls, wishing the plaster could speak. The days that follow are a blur of rain and whispers. The house becomes a spectacle. People travel from the surrounding villages just to stand at the gates and stare in the windows, imagining the secrets that lie behind the velvet drapes. The press descends, hungry for details. They write of the great crime of 1860, painting the house as a Gothic mansion of horror. But inside, the routine tries to reassert itself. Meals are served, beds are made. The clock in the hall continues to tick, tick, tock, tick, tock, indifferent to the tragedy. Yet, the atmosphere has changed. The air is thick with suspicion. Every glance is loaded with meaning. Every silence is heavy with unspoken accusations. The family moves through the rooms like ghosts, avoiding each other's eyes. The nursemaid is questioned, released, questioned again. Was it a lover? Was the child an obstacle? The theories swirl like the dust motes in the shafts of light that pierce the library windows. But nothing sticks. There is no evidence, only the missing night dress. Ah, the night dress. It is a small detail, a mundane anchor in the sea of confusion. One of Constance Kent's night dresses is missing from the laundry list. It is a simple cotton garment, unremarkable in every way, yet its absence becomes the focal point of the entire investigation. Where did it go? Was it stained? Was it burned in the kitchen fire? Completely as the piece of Road Hill, completely as the piece of Road Hill House. And so the local police fail. The mystery deepens. The public outcry grows louder. They demand an answer. They demand a villain. And when the local authorities cannot provide one, a call is sent to London, to Scotland Yard, to a man who is known for seeing what others miss. This is where the story shifts. It moves from a tragedy of a lost child to a chess match between a detective and a house. But before the inspector arrives, let us pause. Let us stand in the nursery one last time. The cot is empty now. The room is cold. The door is closed. Outside, the rain has started to fall again, a soft, steady drumming on the roof. The house in the valley waits. It has absorbed the violence of the night and hidden it beneath the floorboards. It presents a blank face to the world, a mask of Georgian symmetry and calm. But we know now that the calm is a lie. We know that the safety of the locked door is an illusion. We know that sometimes the monster is not under the bed, but tucking you into it. The silence of Road Hill House is not empty. It is full. It is full of questions that hang in the damp air, waiting for the man from London to pluck them down. The stage is set. The players are in position. The tragedy has occurred. Now, the unraveling begins. As the rain intensifies, blurring the outline of the trees and turning the gravel drive into a river of gray, we can almost hear the carriage wheels approaching. They are distant at first, a low rumble in the valley, but they are coming closer, bringing the logic of the city to the chaos of the country, bringing light into the fog. But that is a journey for the next chapter. For now, let us leave the family in their quiet, terrified vigil. Let us leave the nursery door ajar. Let us step back into the mist, feeling the chill of the Wiltshire air, and remember that even the darkest secrets have a way of finding the light, no matter how deep they are buried. The fog swirls, the gas lamp flickers, and the house sleeps, dreaming of the past, waiting for the future to knock on the door. Hello everyone, and welcome back to the channel. I know many of you enjoy listening to these stories as you fall asleep. So before you drift off, I'd love for you to leave a comment letting me know where in the world you are tuning in from. Perhaps you are listening from a place where the rain is falling against the glass, just as it is here. Tonight, we step back in time. We travel to a world lit by gaslight and shrouded in shadow. We tell these stories not to disturb the spirits of the past, but to remember the lives lived within the fog. These are real people, real histories, softened by the passage of a century. In the fog, edges are blurred, urgency fades. What remains is the story. The past is a safe place to rest, where the outcome is already written and the silence has already fallen. History is not a loud thing. It is not the clamor of battle or the shout of a headline. It is the quiet accumulation of moments that no one thought to record. It is the sound of a teaspoon stirring sugar into a porcelain cup while the rain lashes against the window pane. It is the scratch of a pen on parchment in a room where the fire has burned low. It is the way the light catches the dust motes dancing in the heavy air of a Victorian parlor. Tonight, we are not hunting for clues. We are simply walking through the rooms where these lives were lived, observing the stillness that settles after the storm has passed. We begin our journey not with a person, but with the atmosphere itself. Imagine, if you will, the London of the late 19th century. It is a city that breathes. The air is thick, carrying the scent of coal smoke and damp wool, a heavy blanket that muffles the sharp edges of the world. The fog here is not merely weather. It is a presence. It rolls off the Thames in great silent waves, curling around the iron railings of the parks and pressing against the glass of the street lamps. It turns the city into an archipelago of isolated islands, each pool of yellow gaslight, a small contained world floating in the gray. In this fog, sound behaves differently. The clip-clop of a horse's hooves on the cobblestones does not echo. It is swallowed, dull and rhythmic, like a heartbeat slowing down for sleep. The cry of a street vendor is stripped of its urgency, reaching the ear as a distant melodic drift. To walk through these streets is to be held in a suspension of time, where the buildings loom like cliffs in a sea of mist, and the rest of the world feels very far away. We find ourselves drawn to the windows of these houses. Behind the heavy velvet drapes, life continues in its regulated, comforting rhythm. We see the silhouette of a woman brushing her hair by the vanity. We see the glow of a hearth fire reflecting on polished mahogany. We see the rituals of the evening, the locking of doors, the extinguishing of candles, the winding of clocks. These are the mundane anchors that hold us to the earth. They are the small, repetitive acts that define a life, and they continue even when the world outside is lost to the whiteout of the fog. There is a comfort in this distance. When we look back across the span of 150 years, the horror of the events we are about to discuss is diluted. It loses its sharp sting. It becomes a tragedy in the classical sense, a somber play that has already reached its final curtain. The people involved, the victims, the accused, the witnesses, they are all at peace now. Their fears have ended. Their questions have been answered, or else dissolved into the great silence of history. We are merely visitors, walking softly through the museum of their lives, careful not to touch the glass. Tonight, we will visit several of these quiet places. We will travel from the enclosed gardens of a country manor to the windswept decks of a ship lost at sea. We will sit in the corner of a courtroom in Glasgow and walk the golden hop fields of Hampshire. But we begin our journey by leaving the city behind. We leave the dense, coal-choked air of London and travel west. The noise of the metropolis fades, replaced by the rhythmic drumming of rain on the roof of our carriage. We pass the We travel north, far north, leaving the rolling hills of the English countryside for a place where the air is sharper, colder, and filled with the grit of industry. We are going to Glasgow. The year rolls back slightly to 1855. If London is a city of fog, Glasgow is a city of smoke and stone. It is a place of hard edges and towering tenements, a city built on the Clyde, where ships are forged from iron and sweat. The rain here feels different. It is icy and persistent, drumming a relentless rhythm on the slate roofs and the cobbled streets. In this city of commerce and hard labor, there lives a young woman named Madeline Smith. She is not a creature of the factories. She belongs to the upper crust of Glasgow society, the daughter of a wealthy architect. Her world is one of silk dresses and afternoon teas, of balls and polite conversation. She is vibrant, passionate, a splash of color against the gray backdrop of the city. She has dark, intelligent eyes and a spirit that chafes against the rigid expectations of her class. Madeline is a writer, not of books, but of letters. In the Victorian era, the letter was the vessel of the soul. It was the only way to bridge the distance between two hearts. Ink is a dangerous thing, for it captures the fleeting beat of a heart and preserves it forever. A spoken word vanishes into the air, but a written word remains, a testament that can be read and reread, cherished or used as a weapon. Madeline loves the ritual of writing. She loves the feel of the heavy cream-colored paper under her hand. She loves the scratch of the steel nib as it skates across the surface, leaving a trail of black ink that glistens wetly before drying into permanence. She loves the smell of the wax as she seals the envelope, pressing her thumb into the warm red pool to secure her secrets. She is writing to a man named Émile Langelier. Émile is from Jersey, a man of French descent, a clerk in a warehouse. He is handsome, romantic, and entirely unsuitable. He is poor. He is a foreigner. He is everything Madeline's father would despise. And so, their love story must exist in the shadows. It must exist on paper. They meet in secret. They stand at the basement window of her family's house on Blythewood Square, whispering through the iron bars while the city sleeps above them. The cold Glasgow rain soaks their coats, but they do not feel it. They are insulated by the heat of their infatuation, but mostly they write. Hundreds of letters pass between them. They are hidden in books passed by sympathetic servants, dropped into post boxes under the cover of darkness. In these letters, Madeleine pours out her heart. She calls him her husband. She speaks of a future where they can be together, away from the prying eyes of her family, away from the strictures of society. It is a beautiful, reckless correspondence. It is a paper house built on a foundation of dreams. But seasons change. The fire of infatuation begins to cool. Madeline grows older. She begins to see the world with clearer eyes. She meets another man, a man of her own class, a man approved by her father, a man named William Minnick. He is safe. He is wealthy. He offers a life of comfort and respectability. Madeleine makes a choice. She chooses the safety of the known over the passion of the unknown. She tries to break off the engagement with Émile. She asks for her letters back. But Émile Langelier is not a man to be discarded lightly. He is a man of dramatic sensibilities, a man who views himself as the hero of a tragic romance. He refuses. He threatens to send the letters to her father. He threatens to expose her, to ruin her reputation, to drag her name through the mud of Glasgow society. The letters, once a source of joy, have become a cage. The ink has turned into chains. And so, we come to the pivot. the moment where the romance ends and the mystery begins. It is March 1857. The weather is bitter. The wind howls through the streets of Glasgow, rattling the window panes. Emile is summoned to a meeting. He believes it is a reconciliation. He believes that Madeline has come back to him. He drinks a cup of cocoa. Let us focus on this object for a moment. A cup of cocoa. It is a symbol of warmth, of comfort, of childhood. We can imagine the steam rising from the dark liquid, carrying the scent of chocolate and sugar. We can imagine the warmth of the ceramic cup against cold hands. It is a beverage meant to soothe, to settle the nerves before sleep. Emile drinks it. He finds it sweet, perhaps a little gritty, but the sugar masks the texture. He goes home to his lodgings. He goes to bed. He does not wake up. Well, he wakes up in agony, but he does not survive the night. He dies in the early hours of the morning, confused and in pain, clutching his stomach as the life drains out of him. The doctor is called, but it is too late. The diagnosis is initially unclear. Cholera, heavy metal poisoning. The post-mortem reveals the truth. It is arsenic, a massive amount of arsenic, enough to kill not just one man, but 50. The police go to his room. They find the letters. They find the bundles of paper tied with ribbon hidden in his trunk. They read the words of love, the words of passion, the words of desperation, and they find the name, Madeline Smith. The arrest happens quietly. There are no sirens, no dramatic chases across the rooftops. Just a knock at the door of the polite house in Blitheswood Square. Madeline is taken away. She is charged with murder. It was a tragedy served in the finest china, a bitter ending masked by the sweetness of chocolate. The trial that follows is a sensation. It is the O.J. Simpson trial of the Victorian age. The courtroom is packed every day. People line up for hours just to catch a glimpse of the young woman in the dock. She sits there, composed, dressed in the finest fashions, smelling of lavender water and confidence. She does not look like a killer. She looks like a girl who should be pouring tea in a drawing room, not facing the hangman's noose. The defense is brilliant. They do not argue that she didn't buy arsenic. She admits she bought it. For my complexion, she says. To wash my face. It was a common, if dangerous, beauty trend of the time. They argue that there is no proof she met Emile on the night he died. There is no witness. There is only the letters and the body and the cocoa. The letters are read aloud in court. It is a violation of the deepest kind. Her intimate thoughts, her desires, her foolish nicknames for her lover, all of it is aired for the public to consume. The gallery gasps. The judge frowns. Madeline sits stone-faced, enduring the exposure, and then the verdict. In Scotland, there are 3 verdicts: guilty, not guilty, and a third, unique option, not proven. It is a verdict that satisfies the law but leaves the soul hungry. It implies, we know you probably did it, but the evidence is not quite enough to hang you. It is a shadow cast over a life, a permanent question mark. Madeline Smith walks free. She leaves the courtroom. She leaves the dock. She steps out into the Glasgow fog, pulling her cloak tight round her shoulders. The crowd parts for her. They stare, a mixture of awe and revulsion in their eyes. She does not stop. She does not speak. She walks away into the mist, taking her secrets with her. She leaves Scotland. She moves to London, then to America. She marries again. She lives a long life, dying in New York City at the age of 93. She never speaks of Emile Langelier again. She never speaks of the cocoa. She buries the past under a layer of silence as thick as the earth itself. but the letters remain. They are preserved in the archives, the ink still black, the paper still crisp. They are the ghosts of a love that turned into poison. She walked out of the courtroom and into the fog, taking her secrets with her, leaving only the letters behind. And as we watch her figure disappear into the swirling gray of the city, we are reminded that some stories do not have clean endings. Some doors are never fully closed. They are left ajar, swinging slightly in the wind, offering a glimpse into the darkness, but never revealing what truly lies within. From the gray streets of Glasgow, the rain carries us south again, to a place where wealth offers many protections, but cannot bar the door against unhappiness. Wealth is a wall. It keeps the world out, but sometimes it traps the darkness inside. Tonight we find ourselves standing before the wrought iron gates of the Priory in Balham, where the gas lamps flicker against the encroaching white mist of a London spring. The year is 1876, and the house stands imposing and silent. It waits for us. The gravel driveway curves away into the shadows, disappearing beneath the heavy branches of ancient oaks that have witnessed centuries of quiet passing. Here, the air is thick with the scent of damp earth and the faint metallic tang of coal smoke drifting from the city that lies sleeping in the distance. We are here to witness a life that unraveled not with a bang, but with the slow, agonizing tick of a clock in a velvet-draped room. The Priory was a place built for privacy, a Gothic fortress of white stucco and pointed arches designed to shield its inhabitants from the prying eyes of the street. It was a home that demanded hushed voices and soft footsteps. In the daylight, it was a symbol of prosperity, a testament to the success of the Victorian upper class who sought refuge in the leafy suburbs. But at night, under the cover of the fog, the house took on a different character. The windows became dark eyes reflecting the moon, and the corridors stretched out like long, silent breaths. It is in this stillness that we find Charles and Florence Bravo, a couple who seem to have everything the world could offer. Charles was a barrister, a man of law and logic, young and ambitious. Florence was a wealthy widow, a woman of means and property who had brought the house and its luxuries into the marriage. To the outside observer, they were the portrait of domestic stability. They attended church, they hosted dinners, they rode in their carriage through the common, nodding to neighbors who tipped their hats in return. But walls, no matter how thick, are porous to human emotion. Inside the Priory, the air was often heavy with things unsaid. The silence of the house was not always peaceful. Sometimes it was the silence of a held breath, waiting for an exhalation that never came. On the evening of April 18th, the routine of the house began as it always did, with the rhythmic precision of a well-oiled machine. The sun had dipped below the horizon, taking the last of the warmth with it. The servants moved through the rooms lighting the gas jets. There is a specific sound to a gas lamp coming to life, a soft hiss, followed by a pop, and then the steady, low hum of the flame. It is a sound that defined the Victorian night, a companion to the reading of books and the sipping of tea. The light they cast was warm and yellow, throwing long, dancing shadows against the floral wallpaper and the heavy mahogany furniture. We can imagine the texture of the evening. The curtains, thick velvet in deep crimson, were drawn against the chill. The fire in the dining room grate crackled, consuming the coal and sending waves of heat into the room to combat the dampness of the English spring. The table was set with the finest silver, polished until it gleamed like liquid mercury, reflecting the flames. Crystal glasses waited for the wine, their rims delicate and cold. It was a scene of absolute comfort, a sanctuary of civilization carved out of the night. Charles and Florence sat down to dinner. The meal was simple, the conversation likely sparse. They were joined, as they often were, by Mrs. Cox, Florence's companion, a woman who occupied the strange gray space between servant and family member. She was the keeper of secrets, the third point in a triangle that defined the geometry of the household. We can hear the clinking of silverware against china, the muffled sounds of chewing, the pouring of liquid. On this night, Charles drank Burgundy. The wine was dark, rich, and heavy, a luxury that coated the tongue and warmed the blood. He was a man who enjoyed the comforts of his station, and the wine was a small pleasure at the end of a day. There was no sign of the storm to come. That is the nature of these stories. The tragedy does not announce itself with thunder. It arrives on soft slippers, unnoticed until it is already seated at the table. The conversation may have turned to the weather, or plans for the summer, or the trivial gossip of the neighborhood. The mundane anchors us. It tells us that life is proceeding as it should. The roast lamb was served. The bread was broken. The world outside the windows continued to turn, indifferent and distant. After dinner, the household began the slow winding down process of the night. This is a ritual we all know, the transition from the public face of the day to the private vulnerability of sleep. Charles retired to his room. It was a space of masculine comfort, filled with the scent of tobacco and old paper. He prepared for bed, a routine of unbuttoning and folding, of placing the day's worries onto the dresser alongside his watch and chain. The watch ticked softly, marking the seconds. He stood by the window for a moment, perhaps looking out at the fog that had swallowed the garden. The glass would have been cold to the touch, a barrier between the warmth of the room and the unknown dark. He turned back to the interior. On the bedside table, a water jug waited. It was a standard item in every Victorian bedroom, a vessel of clear, cool water for the thirsty sleeper. It sat there, innocent and unassuming, catching the light of the dying fire. We do not know exactly what happened in the minutes that followed. We only know the outcome, and because the outcome is already written in the history books, we can observe it without fear. We are merely ghosts in the room, watching a man prepare for a rest that would become eternal. Charles drank from the water jug. He swallowed the cool liquid, expecting relief. Instead, he swallowed fire. The poison was antimony. It is a cruel substance, tasteless and odorless, hiding itself perfectly within the water. It does not burn immediately. It waits. It settles into the system, a silent invader. When the effects began, Charles called out. It was not a scream of terror, but a cry of confusion. He called for help. The door to his room opened. Florence appeared. Mrs. Cox appeared. The house woke up. But even in this moment of crisis, we must remember the safety of our distance. This happened a century and a half ago. The pain Charles felt has long since dissipated into the ether. The panic of the household has settled into dust. What remains is the scene. The doctor arriving in his carriage, the horse's hooves clattering on the cobblestones, the leather bag snapping open, the hushed whispers in the hallway. The doctor, a man of science and procedure, was baffled. The symptoms mimicked natural illness, a severe sickness of the stomach, a collapse of the system. But Charles, in his lucid moments, knew better. He whispered that he had taken something. He spoke of the water. The jug was examined. The water was tested. And the truth began to emerge, slowly, like a photograph developing in a dark room. It was not sickness, it was murder. Or was it? This is where the fog thickens, wrapping around the story and obscuring the edges of the truth. Charles Bravo took 3 days to die. It was a slow decline, a gradual fading of the light. During those 3 days, the house became a stage for a quiet, intense drama. The police were not called immediately. In the Victorian era, the sanctity of the private home was paramount. One did not invite the law into one's drawing room unless it was absolutely necessary. The family closed ranks. They nursed him. They watched him. They waited. We can visualize the vigil. The lamps burned low, casting long shadows that stretched across the ceiling. The rain began to fall against the window panes, a rhythmic drumming that marked the passing of time. Florence sat by the bedside, her face a mask of concern. Was it genuine grief? Was it guilt? Was it the fear of scandal? The history books cannot see into her heart. They can only record her presence. She smoothed the sheets. She offered sips of clean water. She played the part of the grieving wife to perfection. And Mrs. Cox? She moved through the room like a specter, fetching towels, whispering to the doctors, her eyes darting between the dying man and the wife. She held the keys to the household and perhaps the keys to the mystery. She knew where the medicines were kept. She knew the tensions of the marriage better than anyone, but she said little. She kept her counsel, wrapped in the black fabric of her dress and the iron discipline of her station. When Charles finally slipped away, the silence that fell over the priory was absolute. It was the silence of a question that would never be answered. The death certificate was signed, but the rumors had already begun to swirl like the mist in the valley. A young, healthy man does not simply die of poison in his own bed without a hand to guide the cup. The inquest that followed was a spectacle, a public unraveling of the private life we had just witnessed. It was held not in a courtroom, but in a local hotel, a setting that added a surreal domestic quality to the proceedings. The room was packed with journalists and curious onlookers, men in top hats and women in bonnets, all eager to peer behind the velvet curtains of the priory. Florence was called to testify. We can see her standing there, dressed in deep mourning black, her face pale against the dark fabric. She was composed, intelligent, and impenetrable. The barristers questioned her relentlessly. They probed into her past, into her first marriage, into her relationship with Mrs. Cox. They exposed the cracks in the porcelain facade of her life. They revealed that Charles was controlling, that he was mean with money, that the marriage was not the idyll it appeared to be. But a bad marriage is not proof of murder. Florence admitted to unhappiness, but she denied the poison. She spoke with a calm dignity that frustrated her accusers. She was a woman protecting her survival, standing firm against a world that wanted to see her fall. "I did not do it," she said, her voice steady. "I loved him." Whether it was a lie or the truth, it was delivered with the conviction of a prayer. Mrs. Cox took the stand. She was less polished, more defensive. She admitted that Charles had been difficult. She admitted that she had bought poison before for vermin. She claimed she had thrown it away. She spun a web of half-truths and evasions, a fog of words that confused the jury and protected her mistress. Or perhaps she was protecting herself. The two women, bound together by the secrets of that house, stood as a united front against the scrutiny of the law. And then there was the theory of suicide. Had Charles, in a fit of jealousy or despair, taken the poison himself? It seemed unlikely. He was vain, ambitious, and fond of life. But it was a possibility that hung in the air, a convenient explanation that would absolve everyone of guilt. The jury deliberated. They whispered among themselves, reviewing the evidence: the water jug, the timeline, the unhappy marriage, the missing poison bottle. In the end, the verdict was as murky as the Thames at twilight. Willful murder by person or persons unknown. It was a conclusion that concluded nothing. It acknowledged the crime, but failed to name the sinner. It was a legal shrug, an admission that the truth was beyond the reach of the court. Florence Bravo returned to the Priory, but the house had changed. The silence was no longer peaceful. It was heavy with the weight of suspicion. The neighbors who had once tipped their hats now crossed the street to avoid her. The invitations to dinner stopped coming. The wall of wealth that had protected her was still standing, but the garden inside had withered. She eventually moved away, seeking a new life in a new place, but the shadow of Balaam stretched long behind her. She died years later, taking the truth of that April night to her grave. Mrs. Cox also faded into obscurity, a minor character in a tragedy who walked off the stage and into the anonymity of the working class. The Priory itself stood for many years, a monument to the unsolved. It became a place of local legend, a house where children would hurry past as the sun began to set, afraid of the stories their parents whispered. Today, the mystery of Charles Bravo remains one of the great enigmas of the Victorian age. Was it the wife, tired of his control? Was it the companion protecting her position? Was it Charles himself in a moment of madness, or was it an accident, a tragic mistake in the dark? We will never know. And in that lack of knowing, there is a strange kind of peace. The urgency of the investigation has faded. The anger of the accusers has cooled. The characters have all gone to sleep, leaving us only with the puzzle. We can look back at the Priory now through the lens of history and see it not as a crime scene, but as a painting. We see the gas lamps glowing warm in the window. We see the rain falling on the slate roof. We see the water jug on the bedside table catching the light. It is a still life of a tragedy, frozen in time, beautiful and sad and distant. The fog rolls in again, covering the tracks of the carriage, covering the grave, covering the house. It softens the edges of the story, blurring the line between victim and villain until they are just shapes in the mist. We leave them there, in the quiet of 1876. We step back from the gates, our shoes crunching softly on the gravel, and turn away. The fire in the hearth has burned down to embers. The clock continues to tick, but it marks the time of a world that has moved on. As we drift away from Balaam, the rain intensifies, drumming a soothing rhythm against the roof of our imagination. It washes away the antimony and the anger, leaving only the sound of water returning to the earth. We travel now, carried by the wind and the rain, away from the suffocating velvet of the city and out towards the open country. We leave the complications of marriage and money behind, seeking a simpler sadness. Our journey takes us south and west, away from the gray stone of London and towards the rolling green hills of Hampshire. Here, the air is sweeter, smelling of hay and hops. The horizon opens up, stretching wide and vast under a sky that seems endless. We are moving towards a place where the tragedy was not born of secrets and lies within a house, but of a summer day that simply went wrong. It was a time when the countryside was the playground of the innocent, where children roamed free under the watchful gaze of the sun. But even in the golden light of a summer afternoon, the shadows can lengthen unexpectedly. We are traveling to Alton, to a small village nestled among the fields. where the memory of a name has outlived the memory of the girl who bore it. The transition from the stifling, gas-lit rooms of the Priory to the open hop fields is a relief to the lungs. We can breathe here. We can smell the earth. But as the sun begins to dip low in the sky, casting the fields in a hue of deep amber, we realize that silence can fall just as heavily on a meadow as it does in a drawing room. The wind rustles through the crops, whispering a story of a Saturday that felt like it would last forever. The year is 1867. The season is late summer, when the days are long and the heat lingers in the soil long after sunset. We find ourselves walking down a country lane, the dust rising in small clouds around our feet. The birds are singing the final songs of the day, unaware that the melody is about to change. We are approaching a moment in history that is both beautiful and heartbreaking, a story that became a legend, woven into the very fabric of the language we speak. But before we step into the fields, let us pause for a moment. Let us listen to the rain falling in our own time, anchoring us in the safety of the present. The past cannot touch us here. It is merely a story, a collection of images drifting through the mind like leaves on a stream. We are safe, we are warm, and we are ready to listen to the wind as it tells us of sweet Fanny Adams. Summer is often remembered not as a sequence of days, but as a single suspended feeling, a golden haze where the sun hangs heavy in the sky and the air vibrates with the hum of invisible life. It is a season that promises permanence, tricking the mind into believing that the warmth on the skin and the green on the bough will last forever. But nature is a cycle of inevitable returns, and every golden hour must eventually surrender to the twilight. In the quiet corners of history, there are summers that never truly ended, seasons that were frozen in time by a single event, preserving the landscape and the people within it, like insects trapped in amber. Tonight, we travel to one such place, a landscape defined by its beauty and its stillness. We find ourselves in the rolling countryside of Hampshire, England. The year is 1867. It is late August, that specific time of year when the earth feels fully ripened, heavy with the harvest, and the days are beginning to shorten just enough to be noticed. We are in the market town of Alton, a place of cobblestones and thatched roofs, surrounded by the verdant climbing architecture of the hop fields. To understand this story, one must first understand the hops. In 1867, they were the lifeblood of the region, tall climbing vines that created corridors of green shade in the heat of the afternoon. They grew upon poles, reaching toward the sun, creating a maze of vegetation that muffled sound and hid the horizon. The scent of them was distinct, earthy, bitter, and sharp, a perfume that clung to the clothes of the workers and drifted through the open windows of the cottages. It was a landscape of labor and leisure, where the rhythm of life was dictated by the rising and setting of the sun and the chiming of the church bells that echoed across the valley. The 24th of August was a Saturday. By all accounts, it was a day of blistering heat. The records from the time speak of a sun that beat down relentlessly upon the white chalk roads, turning the dust into a fine powder that coated the boots of travelers. It was the kind of heat that slows the pulse and makes the eyelids heavy, a weather that demands stillness. In the town of Alton, the shops were open, but the movement was lethargic. Horses stood with their heads low in the shade of the elms, flicking their tails at flies, while the shopkeepers fanned themselves in the doorways, watching the heat shimmer off the stones. In this atmosphere of drowsy permanence, we find three young girls. Among them is Fanny Adams, 8 years old, a child of the village whose life was as simple and structured as the rows of hops that lined the fields. She was, by the descriptions left to us, a bright spirit, woven into the fabric of her family's daily routine. On this particular afternoon, the heat had driven the children out of the house, seeking the open air of Flood Meadow, a common land not far from her home on Tanhouse Lane. We can see them clearly in the theater of our imagination. They are dressed in the heavy cottons of the era, bonnets tied under their chins to ward off the glare of the sun. They move with the unhurried pace of childhood, their voices carrying lightly over the grass. They played the games that children have played for centuries, games of tag and imagination, turning the meadow into a kingdom where the only rule was to be home before the lamps were lit. The meadow was a sensory tapestry. The grass was long and dry, whispering against their skirts as they ran. The crickets were loud, a rhythmic scraping that rose and fell with the wind. To the north, the hop garden stood like a green wall, a dense forest of vines that offered shade and mystery. It was a perfect afternoon, the kind that feels safe because it is so open, so bright, and so utterly ordinary. As the afternoon wore on, the sun began its slow descent, changing the light from a harsh white to a softer, deeper gold. It was during this shift in the light that a figure appeared on the lane. He was not a monster in the theatrical sense. He was a man in a frock coat, a solicitor's clerk named Frederick Baker. He was a part of the town's scenery, a man of papers and ink, respectable in appearance, wearing the uniform of the professional class. He moved through the heat with a purpose that seemed at odds with the lazy drift of the afternoon. The interaction between the man and the children was quiet. There was no shouting, no sudden violence to break the stillness of the meadow. It was a conversation of low tones. He offered them halfpence, small copper coins that held the promise of sweets from the village shop. It was a transaction of the time, a mundane exchange. He asked Fanny to walk with him toward the hollow, toward the deeper shade of the hop garden. The other two girls, Minnie and Lizzie, took their coins. They were younger, perhaps more easily distracted, or perhaps they simply felt the pull of the sweet shop more strongly than the curiosity of the hollow. They turned back toward the town, their small boots kicking up dust as they ran, the coins warm in their hands. They left Fanny at the gate, a small figure framed against the towering greenery of the hops. This is where the safety frame of history protects us. We do not need to walk into the hollow. We do not need to see what happened beneath the canopy of the vines. We remain with the afternoon itself, which continued to unfold with an indifferent beauty. The sun continued to shine. The birds continued to sing. The world did not stop, though a life was ending. It is a profound and melancholic truth that the earth does not mourn in the moment of tragedy. It simply persists. Back at the house on Tanhouse Lane, the rhythm of the evening began. Harriet Adams, Fanny's mother, was preparing the evening meal. We can imagine the sounds of that kitchen, the clatter of ceramic plates, the hiss of the kettle on the stove, the smell of baking bread. She would have glanced at the clock on the mantelpiece, noting the time. 5 o'clock. The sun was dipping lower, casting long, stretching shadows across the floorboards. The return of Minnie and Lizzie without Fanny was the first ripple in the quiet surface of the evening. They spoke of the man, of the halfpence, of the hollow. Children's stories are often fragmented, difficult to piece together, but the absence was clear. Fanny was not there. Harriet's journey to the meadow was not a frantic dash, but a walk of rising concern. The heat had broken, replaced by the cooling air of the early evening. She walked the path the girls had taken, calling her daughter's name. Fanny. The name drifted over the tall grass, swallowed by the vastness of the fields. There is a specific quality to the silence of a rural evening. It is deep and heavy, amplifying every sound. The snap of a twig sounds like a crack of thunder. The rustle of a bird in the hedgerow sounds like a footstep. She met Frederick Baker at the gate. He was returning, calm, composed, his boots dusty but his demeanor unruffled. He tipped his hat. He spoke with the polite cadence of a man who had nothing to hide. He denied seeing the girl. He suggested she might have gone to play elsewhere. He was so ordinary, so terrifyingly mundane, that Harriet let him pass. She watched him walk away toward the town, a silhouette fading into the gathering gloom. As twilight settled over Alton, the search began in earnest. It was a community endeavor. Neighbors left their suppers, lighting lanterns that bobbed like fireflies in the darkening fields. The men moved in lines through the tall grass, beating the ground with sticks, while the women stood at the gates, wrapping their shawls tighter against the evening chill. The atmosphere shifted from confusion to a collective heavy dread. The discovery, when it came, was not a moment of noise, but of profound silence. They found her in the hop garden, returned to the earth. The details of what they found are preserved in the dusty archives of criminal history, but we need not recite them here. It is enough to know that the violence was absolute, a stark contrast to the peaceful setting in which it occurred. The hop vines, which had stood as silent witnesses, now stood as a vigil. The golden afternoon had resolved into a tragedy that would scar the town for generations. But the story of Sweet Fanny Adams is not just a story of a crime. It is a story of how a community processes the unthinkable. The arrest of Frederick Baker was swift. He was found in the offices of the solicitor where he worked, surrounded by the quiet order of law books and ledgers. There was no resistance. In his pocket, they found a diary. The entry for that Saturday was chilling in its banality. It did not speak of rage or madness. It contained a simple meteorological observation. Saturday, 24th August, killed a young girl. It was fine and hot. It was fine and hot. These 5 words capture the true horror of the event, not the act itself, but the detachment of the actor. To him, the ending of a life was noted with the same emotional weight as the weather. It was a fact to be recorded, a task completed in the heat of the day. This dissonance, this gap between the enormity of the loss and the triviality of the killer's mind, is where the true haunting lies. The legal process that followed was a ritual of restoration. The town needed to see order imposed on chaos. The trial was held in Winchester, the ancient capital, a city of stone and history. The courtroom was packed, the air thick with the smell of damp wool and nervous perspiration. Baker stood in the dock, a man who seemed smaller than his crime, a bureaucratic figure caught in the machinery of justice. The verdict was inevitable. The sentence was carried out. The law had done what it could, balancing the scales in the only way it knew how. But the memory of Fanny Adams could not be contained by a court verdict. She was buried in the Alton Cemetery under a headstone paid for by voluntary subscription from the villagers. The inscription was long and sorrowful, a testament to the grief of a town that had lost its innocence. The stone still stands today, weathered by 1.5 centuries of rain, covered in patches of slow-growing moss. The sharp edges of the carving have been softened by time, just as the sharp edges of the grief have been worn down by the passing years. The most curious part of this story, and perhaps the most hypnotic, is what happened to her name. In the years following 1867, the name Fanny Adams began to drift away from the girl herself. It entered the lexicon of the British Navy. Sailors, known for their dark humor and their need to cope with the harsh realities of life at sea, began to use her name as a slang term for their tinned meat rations, a grim joke about the mystery of the contents. Over decades, the meaning shifted again. Sweet Fanny Adams became a phrase used to describe nothing at all or something of little value. It traveled from the hop fields of Hampshire to the decks of battleships and then into the general vernacular of the English language. Millions of people have used the phrase to mean nothing, unaware that they are speaking the name of an 8-year-old girl who once played in a meadow on a hot Saturday in August. There is a strange comfort in this linguistic drift. It suggests that while tragedy is sharp and specific in the moment, time has a way of dissolving it, turning it into something abstract, something that can be spoken without pain. The horror fades, leaving only the rhythm of the syllables. The girl has become a ghost of the language, present in the speech of the living, yet entirely removed from the sorrow of her death. Now, let us return to Alton as it is today. The hop fields are largely gone, replaced by modern crops or housing, but the shape of the land remains the same. The hills still roll gently toward the horizon. The sun still rises and sets with the same indifferent majesty. If you were to walk down Tanhouse Lane on a late August evening, you would feel the same heat rising from the tarmac that once rose from the chalk dust. You would hear the same cicadas singing in the hedgerows. We can stand in that imaginary field and feel the peace that has returned to the landscape. The events of 1867 are just a layer of history beneath our feet, no more threatening than the roots of the ancient trees. The fear has evaporated, leaving only the silence. It is a silence that invites rest. It tells us that everything passes. The heat of the day gives way to the cool of the night. The urgency of the investigation fades into the dusty records of the archive. The pain of the loss softens into a memorial stone. We are left with the feeling of a long, slow exhale. As we leave the hop fields of Hampshire, we carry with us the image of the golden light, not the darkness that interrupted it. We move away from the land, drifting further south and west toward the coast. The smell of dry grass and earth begins to fade, replaced by the sharp saline tang of the ocean. The air grows cooler, damper, charged with the energy of the tides. Our journey is taking us away from the solid ground, away from the villages and the towns, and out into the vast blue emptiness of the Atlantic. We are moving toward a mystery that is not defined by what was found, but by what was lost. We are moving toward a ship that sails forever in the imagination, a vessel of wood and canvas that became the ultimate symbol of the unknown. But before we step onto the deck of that ghost ship, let us linger for a moment in the transition. Let the sound of the wind in the hop vines merge with the sound of the wind in the rigging. Let the stability of the land give way to the gentle rocking of the sea. The night is deep now. The fog that clung to the streets of London and the fields of Alton has rolled out to sea, meeting the mist that rises from the waves. We are safe in this drift, carried by the narrative current. The world of 1867 is a distant shore, its lights twinkling faintly in the dark. getting smaller and smaller as we sail away. There is no need to worry about the destination. The ocean is wide and the stars are fixed. We are simply travelers in the night, moving from one silence to another, guided by the stories that act as our lighthouses. Listen to the sound of the water. It is the heartbeat of the planet, slow and rhythmic. It washes away the dust of the road. It cleanses the memory. It prepares us for the solitude of the open sea. We are ready now. The land is behind us. The horizon is empty. And the Mary Celeste is waiting.